Hi and welcome in 3.11 almost max possible IIQ standard league ice shot magic find build. In this video I will also give some tips on how to adapt this build to Harvest League and which of the IIQ items are possible to get there and which are not. But I don't plan to make a Harvest League magic finder and I'll focus on standard league version. This version contains cluster jewels changes. They were possible to get at 3.10 on standard, but prices were very high, so I've made these changes just when the leagues merged now with 3.11 patch. T14 plus maps are possible to do with this build, but some higher rolled maps and some bosses are still problematic, so currently I use this build to farm low tier maps until I upgrade it to be better. It's much stronger now with cluster jewels introduced to the game, and it feels like builds can be customized more now, which is great. Some parts of this build remains unchanged since 3.10, so some of the informations will be repeated. Here are the IIQ and IIR values. My current item quantity percentage values are 194 flat and 51 temporary from Wind Reaper and Divination Distillate bonuses, which gives a total number of 245. Max possible values are 219 flat plus 52 temporary, which is 271 in total, so I missed 26%. I don't have one of the two 5% increased effect of Flask passive, which would give additional 1% of IIQ from Flask effect. I don't use the 15% IIQ String of Servitude belt, which is the max for the belt slot, and I don't have 10% IIQ from the Syndicate Talisman Corrupted Implicit. So this is my current gear. Bow is a legacy Wind Reaper, but don't worry if you don't have a legacy version, it's not a big difference and you wouldn't start dropping Exiles and Mirrors by getting the legacy one. Quiver is a perfectly rolled Rigwald's Quills with point blank Corrupted Implicit mod. It's good mainly because of the fork bonus. Point blank Corrupted Implicit mod lets me free the point blank skill passive from the skill tree and allocate this point elsewhere. In future I wanna get a good rare Quiver. Rigwald's isn't the best in slot option for sure, and its downside is no HP at all. Helmet is a rare lion pelt with 20% quant and a lot of life, which is very important in this kind of builds, so you don't die all the time, since the defenses in Magic Find builds are very often not too good. Armor is the Grid's Embrace chest, which is the only body armor that gives 15% quantity and also 50% item rarity. Mine has 15% quant and 48% rarity. I have the 50% increased damage Corrupted Implicit mod on it, which is better than the +1 to gem levels, because it affects both mapping and single target skills, as well as the other skills that I use. Gloves are the legacy unique Sarima's Touch gloves with maximum 24% quantity possible on this item slot. Good option is to mirror a 20% IIQ rare gloves, which are much stronger, but then you lose 4% quant. I don't have a mirror to get the rare gloves now, and I think I prefer the unique ones because this build is intended to achieve as much IIQ as it's possible without any compromises. The enchant is of Fury. It's very good for bow builds, but right now I use a pair without any enchant because projectiles from enchant attacks cannot be supported by IIQ gem, so I would lose a tiny amount of IIQ, so it's a bit less damage in favor of a bit more effective IIQ. Boots are the legacy unique Goldworm boots, which gives 30% IIQ and it's the maximum possible value on this slot. It's the same situation as with gloves. You can get rare ones with 20% quant and you get more life, movement speed and damage, but it would also sacrifice 10% of IIQ. Because of the fact that they grant only 10% movement speed, the enchant is also 10% movement speed to be a bit faster. The amulet is a rare 20% IIQ one with tier 1 life and Constitution Anoint to increase life pool even more. Amulets can be converted into spine-fused talismans in the Syndicate at Jorgen in Research, which with some luck would grant additional 10% IIQ on the implicit, resulting with 30% IIQ on this slot. This 10% of IIQ here is the only 10% that I actually miss to be able to achieve the maximum possible quantity value in the game. The only other sources of IIQ right now are increased effect of Flask with Pathfinder Ascendancy, but it's only a temporary buff when the IIQ Flask is active, and the other theoretical source is on the rings with 5% IIQ Val implicit, but it would require a 20% IIQ level 84 ring base but from what I know they don't exist in the game, or they are just on some inactive accounts, so right now they are most likely impossible to get. It has fertile catalyst applied for increased life. My rings are rare ones with maximum 20% IIQ for this slot and tier 1 life mods. In future I'd like to mirror some good 20% IIQ rings. They also have fertile catalysts applied for more life. Belt is a headhunter because it's the most enjoyable and crazy item in this game, and it gives so much fun that I just can't stop using it since I've started. People love it or hate it, I'm in the first group, and that's why it's the only item slot that I've sacrificed IIQ for better fun and build power. Catalyst's choice is also the fertile ones. Max possible IIQ on the belt slot would be a string of servitude with 15% IIQ and no other stats. Another option is a legacy 12% IIQ Perendus Blazon, and if you somehow manage to get the level 84 legacy version and be lucky enough to hit 5% IIQ corruption implicit, you would have 17% IIQ, but I'm not sure if this kind of belt even exists, and you would really need a lot of luck to get it. Perfect option for me would be a headhunter with 5% IIQ implicit, and it's my goal for this slot. Flasks remained unchanged since the previous version. Because of the Grid's Embrace, minus 20% movement speed and poor 10% movement speed on the boots, I try to get some more of it wherever it's possible, so I use Cinder Swallow Urn with a movement speed veiled mod, and the flask itself grants Onslaught that has additional 20% movement speed. It's not visible on the flask itself, but you can see it on the tooltip. Another flask is the Quicksilver one, also for movement speed, and it has bleed immunity suffix. I will swap it for the one with freeze immunity mod as soon as I'll get the corrupted blood cannot be inflicted to you implicit on one of the skill tree jewels. I'm still working on it, but no luck yet. This jewel implicit is a must-have for every PoE build. Third flask is a divination distillate for IIQ and IIR bonus. Never increase quality of this flask because you cannot make it back, and it will decrease effectiveness of flask effect duration. It would last shorter as it would regenerate more life and mana in the same amount of time, and when it's fully regenerated the flask effect would end faster. Some players say that this flask can only work good with some special setups, but I don't want to sacrifice too much to get more of its effect, and even when it lasts only from time to time, it's still very rewarding in my opinion. This flask also grants plus 6% to maximum resistances, but currently my overcapped resistances are not as high to benefit from all of this 6%. If you want to solve this problem, use the Wise Oak flask, as it would overcap resistances to get this bonus, and with the cold resistance being the highest, it would also grant additional 20% cold penetration if you have the legacy version. For now I'm not using the Wise Oak flask in favor of the legacy Atsiris Promise, which adds a lot of chaos damage and grants 2% chaos damage leached as life, which greatly helps with survivability and boss tanking. I really like the Wise Oak flask too. I was using it in 3.9 version, and maybe I will start using it again in future. Last flask is the Bottled Faith. It gives a lot of damage and creates a very large AoE consecrated ground that also greatly helps to survive in hard situations. If you're using Bottled Faith, remember to define orb the +% to critical strike chance mod, which is very strong. This is just my personal flask setup preference, and I think it's really a free choice here depending on what do you like and which gameplay style do you prefer. I may be making a mistake here, but I'm not using Dying Sun for +2 projectiles because the barrage support gem gets 5% less attack speed per projectile, so it would be good for my mapping with Ice Shot skill supported by greater multiple projectiles, but not that good for bossing while supported by barrage support. The main 3.11 update of this build was the Cluster Jewels introduction. I used 2 large cluster jewels, 1 medium cluster jewel and no small cluster jewels. This setup also lets me use 2 more non-cluster jewels, so in total I used 3 cluster jewels and 8 non-cluster jewels, so it's 11 jewels in total. My first cluster jewel is a large one with elemental damage node, and it's located at the right side of the tree. It has allocated Vengeful Commander for 30% increased effect of hatred, Prismatic Heart with +10% to all elemental resistances, also with increased elemental damage, and Doriani's Lesson with some life leech and additional increased elemental damage too. This jewel has 2 jewel sockets, In one of them there's a searching eye jewel socketed, and in the second one there's a medium cluster jewel with critical strike chance node. It has allocated precise commander with increased crit strike chance and increased crit multi, and pressure points for increased crit strike chance and 5% chance to deal double damage with critical strikes. It has one jewel socket with searching eye jewel socketed. Third cluster jewel is a large one with cold damage node. It's located on the bottom right side of the tree. It has allocated Vengeful Commander, same as the other large cluster jewel, and Blanketed Snow for 10% cold penetration. The disorienting display notable isn't allocated. In the two jewel sockets there are two non-cluster jewels socketed. My strongest skilled tree jewel is Watcher's Eye jewel with +% to critical strike chance while affected by hatred, which is really good, especially for Wind Reaper. Of course, I could get a better Watcher's Eye. Here are my other jewels socketed in the non-cluster jewel sockets. Let's have a look at the skill tree. On the skill tree I try to get as much life as I can. Other important thing, like I've mentioned before, is movement speed, so I have Fleetfoot, Quickstep and Fangs of the Viper allocated, and they all together grant additional 20% of it. Dropping point blank on the tree, which I have on the Quiver Corruption implicit mod, lets me get another point to use it on the tree. I have allocated one of the two 5% increased effect of flasks points, so my Divination Distillate 25% IIQ is now 26. Another important notable is Fangs of Frost that grants 8% cold penetration, 30% cold damage and 10% increased effect of chill that helps slowing down bosses, same as the Hypothermia gem. I've dropped the Primeval Force notable node with 5% elemental penetration, because now I have 10% cold penetration from Blanketed Snow cluster jewel mod. My Ascendancy is Deadeye and it remains unchanged since the 3.10 version. It has Ricochet for +1 chain, Endless Munitions for +1 projectile, Gathering Winds for increased movement and attack speed from Tailwind, and Far Shot, which mitigates the point blank penalty with long range attacks. My Pantheon also remains unchanged. It's Soul of Lunaris as a major god, mainly for physical damage reduction, which is a weak point of this build, and Soul of Shakari as a minor god for poison immunity. Bandits quest is Help Alira for additional +15% to all elemental resistances and a nice 20% crit strike multiplier. Here are my skills and auras setups. My gems setup hasn't changed since the previous 3.10 version of this build. I've only upgraded some of them. Main 6-link skill for map clearing is Ice Shot connected to greater multiple projectiles. I still don't have the Awakener version. Awakened elemental damage with weapons. Awakened added cold damage. Note that the Awakener version of this gem at level 5 gives +1 to active cold skill gems, which is the Ice Shot gem in this case, so it's a really good synergy. Next gem is increased item quantity. Last gem is Hypothermia, which works really well for me because Ice Shot skill always chills enemies, so I'm getting the massive more damage bonus from it. Just in case you didn't know, more damage mod scales way better than the increased damage mod. I've also tested other gems instead of Hypothermia, and the ones that I think are quite good are Mirage Archer for fast map clearing and Damage on Full Life gem, which adds 59% more damage on full life, but for me Hypothermia works best, mainly because of the freeze chance for Magic Find bonus and increased effect of chill to slow down enemies. Secondary 6-link for single target monsters and bosses. It's basically almost the same gem setup as the first 6-link, but the only difference is Barrage Support gem instead of greater multiple projectiles. Note that this is Barrage Support gem, not the Barrage Skill gem, which is a whole different thing and I'm not using it. By the way, don't do this mistake and don't buy level 21 version of Barrage Support gem, because there's no difference between 20 and 21 until you get +1 to this gem somehow, so it's level 22, which would result in -1% less damage. -1% less damage may not seem like too much, but at min-max character this 1% scales really good and makes a big difference. Hypothermia gem is perfect here because of its increased effect of chill, which really helps with slowing down and overleeching bosses. For power charges generation source I use the old good Herald of Ice plus Curse on Hit plus Assassin's Mark combo, of course linked to another IIQ gem, so I don't lose any IIQ bonus from enemies shattered with this Herald. Keep in mind that there's awakened version of Curse on Hit gem, but I still don't have it. My other auras are Hatred and Precision, connected with Enlighten level 4 for less mana reserved, so I can level up the Precision aura to level 13 without any mana problems. My movement skill is Blink Arrow. Perfect Blink Arrow combo would be connected with faster attacks, faster projectiles, that also speeds up the teleportation, the second wind support gem, and with the IIQ gem. Currently I don't use any of them because I don't have any free sockets, but if you prefer faster movement skill, you can drop Enlighten and Precision gems and use two of the ones that I've mentioned. It's a personal preference here. I'm doing good with just Blink Arrow and it works fine, even when I'm hunting Valwind's Corrupting Tempest, but of course they would be very helpful. My defensive skill is currently Steel Skin level 18, triggered by cast when damage taken level 14. You can change these gems levels, but keep in mind that the level requirements of them must match, so the skill trigger is possible. If you mismatch them, the Steel Skin won't trigger at all. My offensive damage buff is Val Haste, and I really recommend using it because it's very strong. It increases damage and movement speed. Note that I don't use normal haste aura, which would reserve mana. I'm only using the temporary Val version when I catch enough Val souls to activate it. Both of these defensive and offensive skills are connected to increased duration support gem, so they are lasting longer. My mapping skill GMP setup tooltip shows 113k 514 damage, and with all flasks active it shows 156k 844. On the single target barrage support setup it shows 43k 951 damage, and with flasks active it's 60k 632. Keep in mind that for hypothermia more damage against shield enemies is not shown on the tooltip, and it's a really big damage boost. In-game tooltips are not always accurate and sometimes they just don't show all the stats, so I recommend you to rather check your build in Path of Building program than in the game. I've also compared damage before and after 3.11 skill tree nerf, and the damage tooltips dropped by about 4% after 3.11 on the current character setup. My resistances are 75, 75, 75, and with all flasks up they are 75, 81, 75. So as you can see, and as I have mentioned before, I'm not taking full benefits from +6 to all resistances from Divination Distillate, because they are not overcapped enough. Physical damage reduction is only 3%, chance to dodge attacks is 30%, chance to evade attacks is 24%, and with Tailwind active, which requires just to use any skill, it's 38%. Life pool is 6k 274 with Fertile Catalyst applied on all of the jewelry, amulet, rings and belt. I'm gonna stay on standard, but I'll try to give a few tips on how to adapt it to temporary leagues. There are better and faster Magic Find current meta builds for temporary leagues. I just wanna help with adapting my version, maybe at least it will inspire someone. Bow is of course a Wind Reaper. Quiver should be a Rigwald Squeals or a good rare one. Helmet with 20% IIQ is impossible to get, so I would suggest Devoted Devotion or the Rat's Nest. They both increase movement speed, which is very important in this character. Another options are a good rare helmet or just whatever works for you. Body armor should remain the same, which is the Grid's Embrace chest. Gloves should be non-legacy Sadima Stash gloves that can now have 10% IIQ. Boots should be a non-legacy unique Coldworm boots, which give 20% IIQ. 20% IIQ mod on the amulet is legacy, so the best option would be a Bisco collar or a Syndicate converted talisman with 10% IIQ corrupted implicit mod. You can also get 10% IIQ on level 85 explicit mod Shaper influenced amulets. Best option for rings would be the Ventur's Gamble ones with 10% IIQ. Best belt would be of course a Headhunter. The one with 5% IIQ corruption implicit mod would be perfect, but it's really expensive, especially on the league. Flasks should remain the same as on standard league version, in non-legacy versions of course. Jewels and cluster jewels would be the same as on standard. Of course, abyssal jewels would be the non-legacy versions, so maybe replacing them with classic square jewels with 7% HP would be a good idea. I'm gonna show some highlights from good drops made with this character. Path of Building pastebin and 4th thread with written version of this guide is in the video description. If you don't feel too strong with the standard or with the temporary league version of this build, just swap some of the IIQ items for normal items until you can improve it with some better tree jewels or other gear, because at last this game should be fun and not the struggle. That's all for this version, thanks for watching and see you in the next video.